This time, it wasn't about fighting in the dark depths of the warp. It was a battle of wits, a greater challenge than any physical battle before. Abaddon, the Lord of Chaos, who had personally commanded destructive wars across the universe, now stood before a decision that could alter the course of the entire war. To defeat Spire, the one he had once regarded as a worthy opponent, didn't require any elaborate moves. In fact, letting Spire escape might be the best path to achieving the ultimate goal. Abaddon had been watching Spire throughout the Imperium's campaign. He understood his opponent's mindset, the choices that Spire would make in difficult situations. That was why Abaddon had decided not to strike at Spire's fleet immediately when given the opportunity. Instead, he would allow Spire to escape his grasp in the warp. We don't kill our enemies right away. We let him run, let him feel like he has a chance. Abaddon thought to himself as he stood before the command screens aboard his warship. We'll make him lose himself, and by then, he won't be a threat anymore. In that moment, Abaddon wasn't just fighting for power, he was playing a long game for chaos. Letting Spire survive wasn't weakness, it was a part of a bigger plan. If Spire survived and continued to lead the Imperium's fleet, he would become an even greater threat later on. But that was exactly why he needed to be tested further, and this survival would bring about something far worse for the Imperium. Chaos's fleet remained still, waiting for Spire to make a move. No one in Abaddon's ranks understood the full plan, but Abaddon knew that he had to keep it a secret. Even in the face of devastation ahead, he believed that when the time came, he would make Spire lose everything he trusted, even his spirit. So, rather than attack, Abaddon ordered his forces to stand down. No assaults, no pressures, just watch, and let Spire choose his own path. As Spire's fleet moved through the warp, an eerie silence enveloped the ship, only interrupted by an occasional hum of the ship's fading systems. No signals from the outside, no help from the Imperium. Spire could feel the weight of the situation becoming more precarious, but there was also a strange sensation within him, a sense not of failure, but of freedom within danger. It felt as though he had escaped the clutches of chaos, but there was a lingering doubt in his mind. We've escaped their grasp, but are we truly free? Spire wondered as he stood alone on the bridge. Have we just walked into their trap? The officers around Spire sensed the tension in the air, but no one dared admit that they felt unsettled. As their ship sailed through the vastness of the warp, they couldn't shake the feeling that while they had gained a temporary respite, they were possibly just drifting deeper into the chaos. The situation grew more tense as the ship remained unable to receive any signals from the Imperium, further heightening Spire and his officers' concern for the fleet's fate. Meanwhile, aboard Abaddon's warship, the Lord of Chaos, everything was unfolding according to his plan. Spire may have escaped the initial grasp of chaos, but the truth was, Abaddon never truly wanted to destroy Spire right away. Instead, he was waiting for the perfect moment to create a greater mental challenge for Spire and his crew. We'll let Spire think he has escaped, Abaddon said, his voice dripping with malice. And when he believes he is free, we'll make him realize that he can never truly escape chaos. Spire had not yet realized that the freedom he had just felt was precisely the trap that Abaddon had set. The reason Abaddon had allowed Spire to escape was simple. Spire's existence posed a significant challenge to the Imperium, and now Abaddon would force Spire to confront the truth he couldn't outrun.
Is it really going to work?
As Spire pondered whether he could maintain control over his fleet, his officers began to grow uncertain about the truth of their situation. Had Abaddon truly let them go, or was there a trap waiting for them ahead? No one could be sure, and the uncertainty only fueled the growing instability among the crew. But Spire was a master strategist, and in this moment, he realized that he couldn't let doubts take over. He immediately ordered his officers to prepare for the next move, not only to survive, but also to prepare for any threat from chaos. We must be ready for anything, Spire said. his voice cold but resolute. "Prepare a contingency plan, and never believe that we are safe." Spire felt that something was wrong. The signals from the fleet were growing weaker, and although his ship continued its journey through the warp, he could not deny the feeling of being watched. Every action they took seemed to be under scrutiny in this dark, boundless space. The attacks they had faced from chaos before now seemed part of a much more intricate scheme, a strategy that Spire had not anticipated. It was a deception, and now
we face a challenge
he realized
unlike
he was
any
walking
before.
right into the trap that Abaddon had set. While Abaddon had allowed Spire to escape, Spire knew that there was a deeper plot at play. If before, fighting chaos had been a physical war, now he was facing the manipulation of an unseen enemy. Not just the creatures of the warp threatened them, but the very doubt in his own crew was becoming the most dangerous force of all. "We can't just keep going like this. Something's changing," Spire said, his voice firm but filled with concern as he turned back to the officers. "I feel like we're being watched." One young officer stood up, his face tense as he spoke. "Admiral,
this is some
can
kind
we
of
trust
mental
what
game.
we're seeing? This could all be a mental game. But are we just walking into a trap set
Admiral,
by Abaddon?"
the warp
The
fluctuations
unease and
are
uncertainty
intensifying.
began to spread
Understood.
through the crew,
Our true
who had
fight
once
is
been
not merely
steadfast
against
in
a
their
physical
faith.
enemy,
If
but against
before
the
their
insidious,
strategies had
encroaching
relied
grip
on
of
physical
fear
power,
itself.
now they had to face
The
a
critical
battle that
need
no
for
one could see.
self-understanding
They
to
were fighting
navigate
not
the
just for
treacherous,
survival, but for
ethereal
their very
expanse of the
minds.
warp.
"We're no longer fighting just material enemies," Spire continued. "We're fighting against our own fear.
What's happening?
And if we can't face it, we won't make it out of this warp." He knew that, no matter what, there could be no turning back. As the ship continued to drift through the untold's warp, the strange sensation of loss and spiritual confrontation began to gnaw at Spire. A major decision was looming. Would he dare to continue this journey, or would there be sacrifices that none of them could predict? "We need to understand ourselves to get out of here," Spire said quietly, his expression grave. "Otherwise, everything we've achieved will mean nothing." The fleet stood still, the silence in the ship oppressive, and as Spire felt the shift within himself, the unease among his officers only grew. No longer were they simply facing creatures of chaos, they were fighting a war against the chaos within themselves. Some officers began to doubt whether Abaddon had truly let them escape, or whether there was an even greater trap waiting for them. As the ship continued through the turbulent warp, the flickering of the control systems
lost
became
primary
more
stabilizers.
pronounced. The dark shadows of the creatures from warp began to creep closer. A flash of red light appeared from the ship's inner chambers, signaling that the true confrontation had begun. It was no longer a mental game, it was real. As the officers looked at the screens, they noticed that their fleet was not just fighting the creatures of the warp.
Attention all
They were
hands.
being torn
Status
apart from
report
the
now.
inside. The lost souls in the warp were dragging them in, each fear, each doubt making them weaker. "Stay strong," Spire shouted. "This is not the time for fear. We all know how to fight." Even as the ship remained steadfast in the dark expanse of the warp, Spire understood that keeping his crew's morale intact wasn't just a military strategy, it was a matter of survival. They had to keep going, even though nothing was certain. Under Spire's leadership, his fleet began preparing for a battle not only with physical enemies, but with themselves. The creatures of the warp were not only attacking their bodies, they were infiltrating their minds, pushing them to the edge of insanity. Spectral images and eerie whispers began to invade their thoughts, slowly eroding the crew's mental fortitude. "We can't just rely on our weapons," Spire said, his voice filled with resolve. "We must fight against our own minds." Here, though his officers and crew had been trained under the harshest conditions, they were now facing something they could not see or understand. The specters of the warp
This
didn't have
cannot be
tangible
happening!
forms, but they could drive even the strongest warriors to confusion, creating disorder in their minds. Every soldier had to fight their own fear and doubt,
We will hold this
because if they
line.
didn't, they would never make it through this battle. "We can't let them manipulate us," a young officer said, his eyes filled with concern as he looked at the eerie displays. "They want to break our unity. Spire turned, meeting his officer's gazes. Exactly, he affirmed. We must be stronger, not just physically, but mentally. If we don't overcome their manipulation, we will be defeated. The atmosphere aboard the ship grew thick with tension, as if the warp itself was closing in on them. But Spire did not allow fear to take hold. He knew there was no other option but to face it. His fleet wasn't just fighting the invisible creatures of the warp, they were fighting their own fears. If they couldn't maintain their unity, all their tactics would be useless. Meanwhile, an officer from outside reported that an intense surge of energy was forming within the warp. Admiral, if we don't act now, we won't be able to control the situation.
What's our current status,
the creatures
officer?
of the warp are
Admiral,
pulling us
the warp
into an
core is
electromagnetic storm. We have no choice. We can't stop now, Spire replied. What matters is that we face it head on, using our fighting spirit. Prepare for all possibilities. At the same time, his officers began implementing the strategies Spire had ordered. Each combat unit was given a specific task: protect the ship, maintain their unity, and most importantly, keep their fighting spirit intact throughout this journey. This is a battle of the mind, Spire said to his officers. It's not about fighting with weapons or technology. It's about fighting against ourselves. We must overcome fear and doubt, or everything will be nothing. The units began to mobilize, ready to face the creatures of the warp and the psychological shocks they would cause. Each soldier had to endure and push beyond their own limits, fighting not just for survival, but to protect what they believed in. Although Spire and his crew had prepared for the attack from the creatures of the warp, nothing could truly prepare them for the reality of facing such an enemy. The creatures of the warp were not just physical threats. They were manifestations of chaos, the breaking of all that humanity understood about space and time. They couldn't be defeated by conventional means. They had to be faced with willpower and unwavering spirit. The eerie sounds echoed through the ship again. The whispering voices of lost souls in the warp seeped through the corridors, invading the minds of the crew.
Nothing can make us step
Spire
back.
could feel the assault on their minds stronger than any physical battle he had fought before. His officers could feel the anxiety creeping in, but Spire knew there was only one way to win this: to remain unafraid. We must keep moving forward. Nothing can make us step back, Spire shouted, his gaze fixed ahead. He understood that unity was the only power strong enough to withstand the chaos of the warp. Each officer and soldier had to face their own inner demons and fight their own fears. Suddenly, a deafening roar shattered the silence of the ship, and the vessel shook violently. A powerful electromagnetic wave slammed into the ship's systems, causing the control screens to flicker. All of the ship's automated systems began to shut down, and the ship became a crippled vessel, drifting aimlessly in the vastness of the warp.
Admiral.
Report, Spire barked, his voice commanding and unwavering. A senior officer rushed over and reported, "The main systems are severely damaged. We can't maintain energy for much longer, Admiral. The creatures in the warp seem to be continuously attacking the ship. We cannot let them take the ship," Spire said firmly. "All officers, use all defensive measures, open the scent portal, and prepare for combat." While Spire's officers worked tirelessly to protect the ship, the creatures of the warp began to appear, not in physical form, but as phantoms, grotesque shapes, beings that existed in spaces and times unimaginable. They didn't attack with weapons, but with the manipulation of the human mind. These entities created an intangible force that could not be touched, but could make even the strongest warriors submit. The ship continued to shake. The creatures of the warp drew nearer. A panicked officer looked at the screen, his face paling as he saw horrifying images flicker across the surroundings of the ship. "Admiral, they're coming closer," another officer screamed. Spire remained unafraid. He knew that fear would kill them before any creature could. "Hold firm. We must stand strong in our minds. Don't let them control us." He
Maintain
ordered the
course.
units to continue fighting,
focused.
but this was no longer just a physical battle. It was one where They would have to fight their own weaknesses, their own fears that were weakening their spirits. They wouldn't be able to face these creatures if they couldn't confront the fears inside their own souls. As Spire's ship continued to shake violently, the creatures of the warp became more tangible, their grotesque forms once again, putting his officers and warriors face to face with the terrifying visions of the unknown. The whispers from the warp grew louder, but this time it was not just ordinary whispers.
We need more power.
They were constant, enticing, and agitating voices that attacked deep into the fear buried in every soldier's soul. "Do you see it?" one officer screamed, panic in his voice. "We're being controlled. Our minds are being manipulated." Spire turned to face his officers. The words weren't without merit. There had been moments when even he felt himself being pulled into an inescapable pit. But Spire could not let that fear infiltrate his crew. He knew that these creatures were manifestations of chaos, and if they allowed themselves to be defeated, they would lose everything. "We're not just fighting these creatures from the warp," Spire said, his voice firm and resolute. "We are fighting our own fear. They cannot win if we do not allow them to conquer us in our minds." Spire ordered all his officers and warriors to focus all their mental energy to maintain clarity. They could not defeat this enemy if they couldn't defeat the fear inside themselves. The soldiers under Spire's command had fought through countless bloody battles, but this was an entirely different kind of trial, a battle against themselves. There were no weapons, no conventional battle tactics, and no reinforcements from the Imperium. The ship, in this particular moment, was not just a vessel of war but a test of the human spirit. Spire understood that victory would not come from physical strength, but from the unwavering resolve of their minds. His fleet continued to sail through the vast warp, with the grotesque creatures following close behind, but now nothing could stop them. Spire felt the shift in his crew. Officers became calmer, soldiers became steadier. An invisible bond of unity had formed a power beyond measure. Spire knew that now they were not just fighting the creatures, but they were fighting their own minds, the very ghosts of the warp. "To get out of here, we must do the impossible," Spire said, his eyes burning with determination. "Not just escape the warp, but conquer the fears that have haunted us all this time." His officers and warriors began to act. The original battle strategies no longer mattered. They had to rely on their own psychic abilities to fight the warp's influence, using forces they could not control. Spire's warriors began confronting the creatures from the warp using their minds, and as they fought in their minds, they also fought to preserve the values they held dear. Just as they began to regain control, the creatures of the warp began to fade. The spirits trapped in the sane warp were no longer strong enough to continue their assault. Spire and his crew knew that they had not only triumphed in the physical realm, but had also triumphed in their minds and spirits. This meant they had overcome the greatest challenge chaos and the warp could throw at them. As the creatures of the warp began to fade, Spire felt that his crew had reached a significant turning point in their mental struggle. The entire ship had transformed, no longer just a vessel of war armed with weapons and tactics, but now a fortress built not only of steel, but of the unwavering belief and resilience of every warrior aboard. Yet, despite the victory over the creatures of the warp, escaping the warp was still not guaranteed.
We're about to be
Spire
consumed.
looked at the fleet's signals and the ship's status. They had overcome the physical threat of the creatures, but the ship was still not free of the warp's tumultuous grasp. Though he could sense the shift in space and time, he could not be certain that his fleet would make it out safely. The fleet was still caught in an area of space where nothing could be predicted. "We can't stop now," Spire said, his voice low but firm with determination. "We will not let ourselves be destroyed by this chaos. Prepare for everything. We need to escape immediately." Though Spire had ordered his officers to maintain the fleet's integrity and keep fighting, no one could be sure they would survive the storm of warp. An eerie calm filled the ship, with only the flickering signal from the ship's systems indicating they still existed in this space. Another officer, Captain Darius, stepped forward, his face filled with concern. "Admiral, our ship can't hold much longer. The main systems have completely failed. Communications from the fleet are down. If we don't find a way out immediately, we'll be consumed." Spire looked at the control screen, where signs of the ship's collapse were becoming clear. "We must continue forward. There is no turning back. Stick to the orders. Prepare any possible contingency to get out of here." Spire's fleet continued to sail through the warp, and in that moment, Spire realized that his crew was fighting for more than just survival. They were fighting to preserve everything they had built. Spire had not only survived the external chaos, but had conquered the doubts within his own crew, and that was the key to their survival. With Spire's resolve and the crew's determination, they began to find their escape amidst the chaos. The creatures of the warp no longer had the strength to hold them back. However, as they made their way toward a safe zone, Spire knew that their journey wasn't over. They still had challenges ahead. "We've survived, but our mission is not complete. Prepare for the next trials," Spire said, his unwavering resolve inspiring all those aboard. After Spire's fleet escaped the confines of the warp, an eerie silence filled the space. Gone were the whispers of the warp creatures and the mental manipulation from forces beyond their control. All that remained was the quiet between the stars, a calm that, while peaceful, held a deep sense of foreboding. Spire knew that the true threat was never truly gone. Although they had escaped the pursuit of chaos within the warp, Spire was keenly aware that the battle with the forces of chaos was far from over. His fleet could not simply rejoice in their survival.
We need to prepare
Every
for what comes
hour,
after.
every minute that passed would bring new challenges. Spire could not forget what they had endured.
Escaping the warp
and
does not mean
he knew
we are
that
safe.
within this
Prepare for
stillness,
anything.
dangers beyond imagination lurked. Spire looked at the strategic map on the control screens. Uncharted territories
Unknown
awaited
vessel
them,
detected.
and every decision would be crucial for the survival of
a
the
large
fleet.
has appeared on
They
the
had
screens.
escaped the warp,
It's a chaos
but
fleet,
could they
and we cannot identify
withstand the
their
next
target.
wave of threats from the dark forces that
Prepare
waited
for
beyond?
battle.
"We've
The
weathered
Chaos
the warp
fleet has
storm,"
found us,
Spire
and we
said,
cannot let
his
them
voice
take control
calm
of
yet
this space.
resolute. "But that's just one battle in a long war. We cannot relax just yet. Everything is still at stake." One officer beside Spire looked at him, determination in her eyes. "Admiral, we've beaten the warp. But what next? We need to prepare for what comes after." "Exactly," Spire said, turning to look at the control screens. "Escaping the warp does not mean we are safe. Prepare for anything." Just then, an alarm sounded, cutting through the quiet. An officer from the radar system reported, urgently, "Admiral, a large fleet has appeared on the screens. It's a chaos fleet, and we cannot identify their target." Spire immediately stood up, his gaze sharp as he turned to his officers. "Prepare for battle. The chaos fleet has found us, and we cannot let them take control of this space." Spire's ship accelerated to full speed, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. But Spire knew that this battle would not just be a physical confrontation with the Chaos forces. They would be fighting against things they could not see, forces that would strike at the very core of their minds. As Spire's fleet moved toward the Chaos ships,
We will hold
the
this
space
line.
around them grew heavier. Officers and soldiers could feel the presence of the enemy, but no one could pinpoint where the threat was coming from. The radar signals were unstable,
Chaos
and Spire
fleet
began to
detected.
sense that the enemy was not only attacking their ship, but was also aiming at the very spirits of his crew. "How can we fight what we cannot see?" one officer asked. Spire
Prepare
turned to
for
look at
battle.
him. "We must hold steady. No matter where the enemy appears, we must be resolute. Every strategy, every plan is useless if we lose our faith and our mental strength." As Spire's fleet moved deeper into the dark space, the sounds of battle grew louder. The silence that once filled the ship was now replaced with the deafening hum of weapons systems and the heavy pounding of the ship's engines. The vast expanse of the warp seemed to open up in front of them, but With it came an oncoming storm, an attack from chaos that was not just physical, but psychological. "We can't avoid them anymore, Admiral. We'll have to face them head-on," one of the officers said, his voice filled with worry.
"Officers,
Spire did not falter.
we stand at the precipice.
He had faced countless battles, each one
running.
leaving its scars.
No matter who
But
the
this
animal
time,
is,
he knew
we fight
everything
until
could
the
change in an instant, and the outcome of this confrontation would determine the fate of the fleet. "We're not running,"
Understood, Admiral.
Spire declared, his voice firm. "No matter who the enemy is, we fight until the end. As long as we breathe, we fight." The battle began. Spire's fleet charged toward the Chaos forces, their ships clashing in a fiery explosion of weapons, fire, and energy shields. The once calm space was now filled with the sounds of destruction. Ships colliding, energy blasts tearing through the void, and the roar of engines as both fleets fought for supremacy. As the battle raged, Spire knew this was not just a physical conflict. The warp's influence was still looming over them, twisting the very fabric of reality. The creatures from the warp were attacking not only their ships, but also their minds. The soldiers of Spire's fleet could feel the psychological assault visions
divert
of
power
madness,
to shields.
whispers in their minds,
Hold your position.
trying to break their will. "Fire everything we have. Everything," Spire ordered. "Do not let fear take us." Barn, the heavy artillery of Spire's fleet, unleashed a barrage of firepower, and the Chaos ships were thrown into disarray. But the true battle wasn't just against the weapons of the enemy, it was the unseen enemies, the warp creatures striking at their minds. "We must remain strong," Spire shouted. "We're not just fighting to survive, we're fighting to protect everything we've built." As the fleet continued to engage, Spire noticed the change in his officers. The soldiers, once filled with doubt, now found a renewed sense of strength. They understood that their survival didn't depend on just physical might, but on their unity, their belief in one another. Just as they regained their composure, a massive Chaos warship appeared directly in front of them. It was none other than Abaddon's flagship. Spire's eyes sharpened as he recognized the enemy. "It's here," Spire said, his voice determined. "We finally reached it." "Oh, Cree." Abaddon stood on his warship, watching Spire from a distance, a malicious grin on his face. "At last, we meet," Abaddon said, his voice laced with malice. "But you won't escape me." Spire did not flinch. Everything had been prepared, and there was no turning back. He issued the command. "Commence battle. We won't let the enemy break what we've protected." Spire's fleet faced the full brunt of the Chaos forces in a battle of unrelenting ferocity. The space around them became a chaotic battleground, with every flash of light potentially signaling their demise. Warships collided, energy blasts tore through the void, and the roar of engines filled the air as both fleets fought for supremacy. Spire and Abaddon both knew that only one would remain standing when the dust settled, and the outcome of this battle would decide the fate of it all. Spire stood on the bridge, looking out at the battlefield, his mind resolute. He knew that even though they faced the forces of chaos, nothing could make him falter. He had fought not only for the Imperium, but for everything he believed in the survival of his crew, the lives of those who had fought alongside him. That was something that even Abaddon could never fully understand. On the other side of the battlefield, Abaddon observed the clash, a malicious grin never leaving his face. He knew that this battle was not just a simple confrontation, it was the ultimate test for dominance. Abaddon had always considered Spire a threat to chaos, and now the time had come to eradicate him once and for all. "We will finish this battle in the greatest of wars," Abaddon said, his voice cold and calculated as he watched the battle unfold. Chaos warships slammed into Spire's fleet, not only with weapons, but with intangible forces, creatures from the warp still trying to invade their minds. Spire felt it, and he knew that the true battle was not only against the physical enemy.
Come on.
It was a battle for the minds and spirits of his crew. "Fire everything we have, all of it," Spire commanded. Do not let fear control us. And the heavy artillery of Spire's fleet unleashed a barrage of firepower, and the Chaos ships were thrown into disarray. But the real battle wasn't just against the weapons of the enemy. It was the unseen enemies, the warp creatures, striking at their minds. "We must remain strong," Spire shouted. "We're not just fighting to survive, we're fighting to protect everything we've built." As the battle raged, Spire noticed the change in his officers. The soldiers, once filled with doubt, now found a renewed sense of strength. They understood that their survival didn't depend on just physical might, but on their unity, their belief in one another. And then, just as they regained their composure, a massive Chaos warship appeared directly in front of them. It was none other than Abaddon's flagship. Spire's eyes sharpened as he recognized the enemy. "We finally reached it," Spire said, his voice filled with determination. "This is it." Abaddon stood on his warship, watching Spire from a distance, his grin widening. "At last, we meet," Abaddon said, his voice dripping with malice. "But you won't escape me." Spire did not flinch. Everything had been prepared, and there was no turning back. "Commence battle. We won't let the enemy break what we've protected."